is your bridge to the land and people of Israel. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Israel Connect. And the top headlines I'm going to be covering tonight. The U.S. and Arab nations are planning for a post-war Gaza with a timeline for a Palestinian state being fast-tracked. The two-state delusion is exactly that, a delusion. The Israeli cabinet rejects global recognition of a Palestinian state. Biden goes to the UN Security Council to force a temporary ceasefire on Israel. Why all this madness? What's the big rush? The US proposes a UN resolution supporting a temporary ceasefire in Gaza just ahead of Ramadan, which begins March 10th through April the 9th. And finally, pushback. KeepGodsLand Movement. All this and more in this edition of Israel Connect. We begin tonight with a very alarming headline that appeared in the Washington Post about a week ago on February the 14th. And here is the headline. U.S. and Arab nations plan for a post-war Gaza timeline for a Palestinian state. So some U.S. and Arab leaders, along with Palestinians, met in Egypt last week, and they're rushing to complete a detailed, comprehensive plan for long-term peace between Israel and Palestinians, including a firm timeline for the establishment of a Palestinian state that could be announced as early as the next several weeks. This is outrageous. The Oslo Accords back in the 1990s state explicitly that any final decisions to be made about borders and timelines for a Palestinian state must include the two key parties, which is Israel and the Palestinians. And obviously, Israel was not even invited to the table. This is the height of arrogance for the U.S. to be pushing for this agenda. And they've been beating the two-state solution, the Palestinian state drum, since day one of the war. This has been the U.S. agenda. And how has the Israeli cabinet reacted to this proposed unilateral declaration declaring and decreeing a Palestinian state that the U.S. would recognize? How has the Knesset and the War Cabinet responded to this? Well, the Israeli cabinet in Jerusalem News Syndicate rejects the global recognition of a Palestinian state. And this article ran in jns.org on February the 18th. The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, seemed to downplay reports that Washington is considering recognizing a Palestinian state. And so on Sunday, the Israeli cabinet approved a statement rejecting any unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood, amid reports that the Biden administration is considering such a move. So we know that the Washington Post is basically a mouthpiece for the Biden administration. So when they made this announcement in the Washington Post back on February 14th, this is basically telling everybody, the world, what the Biden administration is up to and what they intend to do. And so the Israeli cabinet has pushed back and said, no, we're not going to go along with this. This would be like if the Palestinians, who are refugees, who are people without a nation, would come to the state of Texas and say, hey, we're going to declare Texas to be unilaterally, it is now Palestine. We're declaring that Texas is now Palestine. And the Texans were consulted. The governor of Texas was not consulted. They weren't invited to the table for any kind of talks. And now we're just going to declare that Texas is now Palestine, or that Texas has now been annexed by Mexico. That's the equivalent of what they're doing here. So here's another article I want to show you, the Two-State Delusion. This ran in tabletmagazine.com. The Biden administration is leading a push to recognize a Palestinian state that will be a danger to the security of Israel. So we see a picture of Abbas, the head of the so-called Palestinian Authority, and Anthony Blinken, who's been over to Israel multiple times since the breakout of the war. And every single time he goes, he is beating the Palestinian drum. We want a two-state solution. We want a Palestinian state. In effect, this would be rewarding the barbarian butchers with a Palestinian state. This is just absolutely insanity There is no support from the people or from the leadership in Israel for a Palestinian state. Now, on October the 5th or 6th, there were many liberal Jews who felt like, yes, let's have a Palestinian state and let's be neighbors and kumbaya, and we can work and play together nicely and play together nicely in the sandbox. But after October 7th, it was a rude awakening for many of the Jewish people, especially those who lived along the Gaza border, and they realized this is not about land. This is about genocide. They want all the Jews dead. And when you see the protesters out on the streets chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, what many of those protesters don't realize, what they're saying is they want to genocide all the Jewish people. They want there to be a one-state solution, and that one state is now Palestine, and Israel no longer exists. That's what that little slogan is saying. No more Israel at all. There's no support for a two-state solution, either on the Palestinian side or the Jewish side. Neither side wants this. So Biden is going to the UN Security Council to force a temporary ceasefire on Israel and to halt the Rafah offensive. So to give you some background on this, Israel's troops, the IDF, have basically neutralized about 80% of the Hamas military forces and military command structure. So the different brigades and troops they've either been killed or they've surrendered. And so to finish the job, they need to go into Rafah. Rafah is the southernmost part of Gaza, and it's a border town to Egypt. And that's where a lot of the Palestinians are now at, is in Rafah. So for Israel to finish the job and, quote, win the war, they need to go into Gaza and take out all of the terrorist structures and tunnels and their commanders. And if the Gazans, the Hamas terrorists want to surrender, they certainly can, but they need to go in to finish the job. And that is also probably where any surviving hostages is in Rafah. So why is Biden going to the UN Security Council to try to force a temporary ceasefire on Israel and halt the Rafah offensive? What is going on here? Why this madness, and what's the rush? Okay, so Ramadan is happening on March the 10th to April the 9th. It's a holy season for the Muslim faith, and they really want to have a ceasefire before Ramadan so that the Muslims can enjoy their holy holidays. So the U.S. has gone and proposed a UN resolution supporting a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. The U.S., Egypt, Israel, and Qatar, which is a terrorist supporting nation, housing a lot of the top Hamas leaders, are now in Qatar. They are seeking to negotiate a pause in the war and the release of hostages held by Hamas. Now, this is code. The code is temporary ceasefire. They'll use those words, but actually what it really means is the temporary ceasefire becomes permanent. In other words, you never resume the war. We'll call it a temporary ceasefire to make it more politically palatable. And then the ceasefire will just never end. That'll be the end of the war. So this is a full court press coming from the Biden regime wanting a temporary ceasefire in Gaza as soon as practical, because they don't want Israel to finish the job and deal with the Hamas terrorists that are down in Rafah on the border to Egypt. So now there's a pushback, and the pushback is the KeepGodsLand Movement. And if you go to this website, KeepGodsLand.com, you will find out more about this movement. But this is basically Jews and Christians who are coming together to say enough is enough. We must stand together and fight for Israel's biblical heartland together. And so basically it's saying we're not going to divide the land of Israel to create or declare a Palestinian state. We want to annex all of Judea and Samaria, because within Judea and Samaria you have hostile Arab communities like Rafah and Jenin and Nablus, and they have lots of Hamas terrorists in those places There's been tremendous amounts of terrorist attacks against the Jewish people. It's like having cancer within your own body. And so to annex all of Judea and Samaria and say all of it belongs to Israel, it's a Jewish state. And in fact, we're going to annex and take Gaza back as well. And so that's what this movement is about. Why do this? Because actually to divide the land violates the Bible. God made a covenant with Israel and with the Jewish people, and he said, this land is your inheritance. It belongs to you and to your descendants forever and ever and ever. And so to divide the land is a complete violation of the Bible. So you can go to KeepGodsLand.com and sign up, get your name on their mailing list, join the movement. Also, they have an excellent news section with videos where you can find the latest breaking news of what's going on this topic, on this issue. And next, right now, as we speak, February 20th to 2023 is the National Religious Broadcasters Conference happening in Nashville, Tennessee. And they have it every year in the spring. And this year, the Keep God's Land launch event is happening on Thursday, February 22nd, from 3 to 5 p.m. And there's going to be a panel of speakers. And basically, they're saying no two-state delusion. Why do we reject the two-state solution? An Arab state in Israel's heartland would pose an existential threat to Israel's security. Neither the Jews nor the Arabs of the region are in favor of creating a two-state solution. A two-state solution that divides God's land would be a direct rejection of God's will as clearly and repeatedly stated in the Bible. So if you live anywhere near Nashville, Tennessee, I encourage you to go to this event. You can go to this web page that I'm showing you, and you can sign up to go. And please join the KeepGodsLand.com movement. It is time for Christians to stand up together with our fellow Jews, to stand and push back against the Biden regime that has beating the drum ever since day one of the war started out to divide up the land and make a Palestinian state. It's absolute insanity to reward the barbarian and butchers with a Palestinian state after what they did on October the 7th. That just isn't even going to be on the table. So please take a stand, go to KeepGodsLand.com, sign up, get your name on their list. And if you're anywhere near Nashville, Tennessee, try to get to this Keep God's Land launch event. That's all I have for now, and we'll see you next time. Shalom.